What you are about to hear will make you look at parenting your children in a completely different light. This shocking story of a 17-year-old girl who was brutally murdered and buried in a grave by her own boyfriend, and I truly believe that watching this video could save your child's life. Jayden Parkinson was a girl who radiated joy and a love for life. Her slightly mischievous nature harmoniously combined with her natural charm. From her early years, there was a special bond between Jayden and her mother, filled with love and trust. The girl's openness and friendliness helped her find many friends at school. Everyone who knew Jayden noted her sensitivity, cheerful disposition, and kind heart. Studies came easily to her, and her dream of becoming a hairdresser inspired her to move forward. But at the age of 7, Jayden's life underwent a dramatic change. Her parents decided to divorce. Custody of the girl, as well as her brother and sisters, was unexpectedly awarded to her father by the court. Together with the children, he moved to Oxford in the United Kingdom. This move was a real shock for the Parkinson family, especially for the children who were used to the atmosphere of love created by both parents. They missed the fun holidays and pleasant surprises that mom and dad would arrange to please them. It remained a mystery how the father managed to get custody of the children. It was clear to everyone that this decision was a real blow to both the children and their mother. It hit Jayden especially hard, as she had an extremely close relationship with her mom. Family friends claimed there were no obvious conflicts or negativity between the couple. However, despite all efforts, the mother failed to defend her right to stay with the children. The teenage years brought new trials for Jayden. Her irrepressible energy and awakened rebellious spirit complicated her father's attempts to cope with his daughter's upbringing. Despite the fact that the girl retained her kindness, charm, and wonderful sense of humor, she faced typical problems of the transitional age, especially after moving to high school. Relations with her father became increasingly strained, despite his sincere attempts to surround the children with care and provide them with everything they needed. Nevertheless, he was stricter and more demanding compared to their mother. At this age, Jayden perceived her father's care as a restriction of freedom and a manifestation of excessive control. The situation was aggravated by the lack of regular communication with her mother, whom the girl missed terribly. All this led to constant conflicts and misunderstandings. In search of understanding and support, Jayden began to run away from home. This problem, unfortunately, is quite common among teenagers. But it is worth noting that the girl did not wander the streets or questionable companies. Instead, she would immediately go to her mother to spend time in the comfort of her home. At the same time, Jayden did not stop communicating with her father, answered his calls, but at the first opportunity, tried to return to her mother, because it was with her that she felt truly loved and understood. Despite all the trials, that special bond between mother and daughter remained. It seemed that the difficulties of adolescence only strengthened their relationship. During one of these visits to her mother, 14-year-old Jayden met a guy named Jake Blakeley, and through him, his older brother Ben. At that time, Ben was already 20 years old. Despite the significant age difference, a mutual attraction arose between Jayden and Ben, and they decided to try to build a relationship. This decision caused an ambiguous reaction in those around them. Some believed that such a choice of partner indicated the emotional immaturity of the young man. However, Jayden herself seemed very attracted to the idea of dating an older guy. Of course, due to her age, she still remained naive and could not always cope with her emotions and feelings. But despite all the warnings, a romantic relationship full of hopes and expectations for a happy future began between these two young people. Jayden dreamed of a happy future, not realizing that her fate was already in the hands of a real monster. From the moment Ben became Jayden's boyfriend, he began to actively integrate into her environment, striking up acquaintances with his girlfriend's classmates. Despite the obvious difference in life experience and views, he managed to find a common language with the school children, and even to some extent become a leader for them. In parallel with this, Ben began to surround Jayden with excessive attention and care, which made the girl fall head over heels in love with him. It seemed that he completely captured her thoughts and feelings. Ben would tell her about a bright future together, painted vivid pictures of their life, built castles in the air. The naive young Jayden believed that it was with him that she would be able to achieve the happiness that her parents had once failed to achieve. But the period of romance and carefree life did not last long. Later, Ben's behavior began to take on more and more possessive and manipulative features. Insults and humiliation began. Just a month after the start of their relationship, he first allowed himself to treat Jayden really rudely. The girl, who found herself in a relationship with a guy for the first time, and much older than her, began to look for the reasons for such a change in herself, in her possible shortcomings. Ben masterfully exploited her insecurity, noticing that Jayden was succumbing to his influence. The girl's naivety allowed him to find fault with any little things in her behavior or words. He arranged real emotional swings for her. At one moment he could say how charming and beautiful she was, and the next moment accuse her of terrible things. Especially often jealousy became a reason for accusations. Ben would come up with a variety of reasons to accuse Jayden of betrayal and deception. It was during this period that the girl found out that her boyfriend was periodically using illegal substances. His emotional instability and mood swings were partly explained by this fact, but all signs indicated that verbal abuse would not be limited to this. When Jayden was already firmly attached to this toxic relationship, Ben's behavior became truly aggressive and cruel. Once, when they were walking with the girl's group of friends, he began to openly express his dissatisfaction with them. This was a typical manipulator tactic, trying to isolate his victim from a close environment, to isolate her from friends. Unfortunately, Jayden did not realize what was happening at that time. Each claim or reproach from Ben made her feel guilty. She really began to believe that it was her behavior that was the cause of all misunderstandings and conflicts. It was then that Jayden first dared to stand up to her boyfriend. She defended her right to communicate with friends, which caused Ben's furious anger. He resorted to a variety of manipulative techniques to make the girl quarrel with her friends. Jayden tried with all her might to maintain these friendly relations. But gradually, everyone began to turn away from her because of the toxic behavior of her boyfriend. Despite everything, feelings for Ben did not fade, although his behavior was becoming more and more outrageous. Once he even allowed himself to hit Jayden in the face. And although it was obvious that such behavior could not be justified, Ben managed to convince the girl that she was to blame herself and deserved it. Jayden's family saw that their daughter and sister was in a toxic relationship with a very dangerous person. Her mother and father were worried about her, tried to get through, but the girl found herself in a state of constant break between family and her beloved. Infatuation clouded her mind, and again she chose Ben. Gradually, his behavior became more and more inadequate and unpredictable. So, after one of the quarrels with Jayden, he caught a neighbor's cat and brutally killed it by cutting off its head. With this act, Ben wanted to take revenge on the girl, so he threw the head of the innocent animal into her bed. Jayden was shocked and horrified by this turn of events. But even after that, Ben managed to confuse her and make her doubt the reality of what happened. Ben masterfully played the role of a lover, but behind his charming smile hid the soul of a real sadist. Ben did not stop at threats to deal with Jayden's pet. He went even further, stating that he could just as easily take the life of the girl herself and her entire family. Young Parkinson, due to her small life experience, simply could not see signs of a serious mental disorder in such behavior. And Ben, meanwhile, continued to masterfully manipulate the inexperienced teenage girl. To prove the seriousness of his intentions, once, when Jayden again tried to get out of his total control, the young man brutally dealt with her own cat. The most terrible thing was that at that moment, the animal was pregnant. This horrific event became the last straw for Jayden. She finally became convinced that her chosen one was an extremely dangerous person. But the girl was completely at a loss. She simply did not know how to solve this problem and end the relationship without catastrophic consequences. Ben kept her close to him, using all possible methods of influence. Now threats were added to his arsenal, which became a powerful lever of pressure on the teenager's psyche. In fact, at that time, Ben had long been in the field of view of law enforcement officers. The guy's life was quite difficult and full of criminal adventures. For a long time, he was engaged in petty crimes, for which he repeatedly got into the police station. Ben was brought up in a foster family, where he had extremely tense relations with his parents. The man who replaced his own father suffered from alcoholism, and more than once subjected the boy to brutal violence in childhood. Ben grew up in an atmosphere of constant fear, endless humiliation and beatings, which undoubtedly left its mark on his fragile child's psyche. Ben's relatives also very quickly realized that their boy was a considerable danger to those around him. So once, when his mother began to express her dissatisfaction with his behavior, because of which he again got into trouble with the law, Ben suddenly exploded in anger. In a fit of mad rage, the young man grabbed a screwdriver and began to threaten his own mother with physical violence. The woman was shocked and frightened by the realization that a juvenile maniac was living in her house. But despite this, she still decided not to write a statement to the police for the time being, but to try to help her son cope with his problems on her own. As a result, instead of prison, the boy ended up at a psychiatric clinic, where a rather revealing conversation took place with one of the doctors. It is worth noting that at the time of that visit, Ben was still in school. However, instead of topics typical for his age, the young man began to talk with the medic about how to commit the perfect murder, then get rid of the body, and at the same time remain unpunished. It's even scary to imagine that the boy was barely 13 at the time. The words of the young patient greatly interested the psychiatrist. He began to question Ben, trying to understand the way he thinks. The doctor hoped that such frankness would help to better understand the boy's diagnosis. But Ben, it seemed, was only too happy to share his ideas. He willingly told that, in his opinion, the best place to hide a body is a freshly dug grave. Like, bury the dead man imperceptibly for yourself and live in peace. There, for sure, no one will guess to look. When Jayden's parents learned about all these alarming facts, they firmly decided to put an end to their daughter's relationship with this dangerous scumbag, who already had the cold-blooded murder of pets on his account. At that time, Ben was already practically openly mocking the defenseless girl. It was clear to the naked eye that Jayden was in an extremely depressed emotional state. Every time she was left alone, the schoolgirl would cry bitterly. She felt helpless, driven into a corner. She saw no way out of this unhealthy relationship, and fervently wished that her tormentor would just disappear from her life forever. In turn, Ben tried to isolate Jayden even from her own family, seeking to completely control absolutely all areas of the young lover's life. When verbal methods of influence did not work, he did not hesitate to resort to outright physical violence. Jayden found herself trapped by a masterful manipulator, feeling completely helpless, but continued to obey his will. The situation only worsened with each passing day. Under pressure from Ben, the girl began to steal things from her own home. The guy, who did not have a permanent job and could not earn money on his own, forced his girlfriend to commit a crime. He convinced Jayden to secretly take various things out of the house, sell them, and give him all the proceeds. Using manipulation and threats, Ben forced Jayden to constantly lie to her relatives. When the family finally noticed the disappearance of many things and exposed the girl, a serious conflict broke out in the house. Relations with loved ones deteriorated significantly, but Jayden did not dare to tell the real reason for her behavior, because she was afraid of Ben's anger. Eventually, the situation escalated to the point that the girl decided to run away from her father's house. Unfortunately, the only place she could move to was her boyfriend's house. At that time, Ben was living with his cousin, but just a few weeks after Jayden moved in, the cousin moved out. Later, the girl recalled with what incredible cruelty Ben treated her during that period. Beatings became a kind of daily ritual for him. At a certain time, he would take Jayden to the bathroom, brutally beat her, and then lock her up there for several hours. The 16-year-old girl found herself in a hopeless situation and simply did not know what to do next. She did not dare to return home because her relatives had caught her stealing. In addition, Ben threatened that if she left him, he would destroy her entire family. From now on, Ben controlled literally every step of his girl. He constantly humiliated her, inflicted physical pain, even pulled out her hair, which dealt a crushing blow to Jayden's self-esteem. The guy was jealous of her of every passerby, cruelly punishing her even for an accidental glance in the direction of another person. At the same time, he himself repeatedly cheated on Jayden, even had a relationship with his brother's girl, which clearly indicates the extremely low moral qualities of this person. Despite the constant manifestations of cruelty, Jayden continued to maintain this toxic relationship. She lived in constant fear that Ben would really carry out his threats and brutally deal with her entire family. Meanwhile, his control over the girl only intensified. It got to the point that when he woke up in the morning, Ben would first lock Jayden in the room and only then go about his business or have fun. For any action, even the smallest, the girl had to get his permission. Of course, under such conditions, she could not study normally. Her whole life was being destroyed before her eyes, but a blind feeling for the manipulator and all-consuming fear clouded her mind, not allowing her to adequately assess reality. Each new day brought Jayden new suffering, but the most terrible test was yet to come. Beatings became an integral part of Jayden's life. They occurred with horrifying regularity. Ben did not shy away from any methods of violence. He strangled the girl, dealt blows with his fists, bit, threw her to the floor, and brutally pushed her with his feet. 2 years had passed since the beginning of this toxic relationship, and Jayden's life had turned into a real hell. But suddenly, a ray of hope appeared in this darkness. Jayden's mother, realizing the full seriousness of the situation, decided to take her daughter to herself at all costs. She made every effort to calm the girl down and force her to completely sever all ties with the abuser. But Jayden, who always showed a rebellious character in communicating with her relatives, perceived her mother's persuasion extremely hostilely. Just a few days passed, and she returned to her tormentor again. The girl became so emotionally dependent on this monster that even under the threat of reprisals against her family, she did not dare to leave him, although deep down she desperately wanted to. Of course, no positive changes occurred. The moral and physical violence only gained momentum. And finally, in November 2013, Jayden took a desperate step to break this destructive relationship once and for all. However, fear for the safety of loved ones did not allow her to return home. Instead, the girl decided to hide in a homeless shelter. Undoubtedly, this is not the best choice for a minor, but Jayden sincerely believed that the staff of the institution would be able to provide her with the necessary help and protection. And most importantly, her ex-boyfriend would not be able to find her there. Unfortunately, these hopes turned out to be in vain. Ben tracked down Jayden pretty quickly. He regularly visited the shelter, continuing to impose his will on the girl. It came to the point of absurdity. Ben even forbade her to visit the toilet. At first, Jayden obeyed this humiliating order, but later she dared to violate it. In the shelter, the girl had the opportunity to communicate with the staff. Experienced employees opened her eyes to the fact that she was in an extremely dangerous and destructive dependence on an abuser guy, a masterful manipulator. They convinced Jayden that such a toxic environment created by Ben could not be considered normal under any circumstances. Gradually, the girl came to the realization that she was not obliged to follow all the orders and whims of her ex to obey his cruel rules. For the first time in a long time, Jayden had a real opportunity to correct the mistakes of the past. Hope for a happy future settled in her heart again. But at the same time, Ben began to notice that his ex-girlfriend was gradually getting out of control. This ignited a furious anger and thirst for revenge in him. The last straw was the realization that Jayden had found herself a new boyfriend. Without wasting time, Ben began to send her threats, trying to restore his control and return the girl to the usual framework of a toxic relationship. He even managed to gradually scare away Jayden's new chosen one, who, frightened by the seriousness of the threats, decided not to take risks and not mess with a dangerous rival. But Ben was not going to stop there. He decided to deal a crushing blow to the reputation of his former girlfriend by publishing her intimate photos and videos on the internet, which he took without the girl's consent throughout the entire period of their relationship. It turned out that he had accumulated a whole collection of such materials. Ben's true goal was to drive Jayden to despair and push her to commit suicide. Unfortunately, at that time, the legislation did not provide for any responsibility for the publication of other people's intimate materials. Only from 2015, such actions began to qualify as crimes on sexual grounds, for which a punishment of 2 years in prison was provided. So in 2013, when the described events took place, Ben actually remained out of reach for justice. Even nowadays, it is quite difficult to prove guilt in such cases, and in the complete absence of a legislative framework, it seemed completely impossible. Jayden could only watch helplessly as the offender destroyed her reputation, but the biggest shock was waiting for the girl ahead. Despite all the bullying, she did not succumb to despair and did not take her own life. However, a few weeks after breaking up with Ben, Jayden found out about her pregnancy. The girl did not even think about getting rid of the child. On the contrary, she hoped that the appearance of a common baby would help resolve all conflicts, awaken the best feelings in Ben's heart, and return their relationship to a normal course. It seemed that motherhood could soften Ben's heart. But this illusion very quickly shattered to smithereens. Despite all the suffering and humiliation that Jayden had to endure, she could not forget about the problems in her own family caused by her parents' divorce. The girl sincerely believed that every child deserves the love and care of both parents. That is why on December 3rd, 2013, she dared to call Ben to inform him about her delicate situation and name him the father of the unborn baby. It is worth noting that for this conversation, Jayden had to use someone else's phone, because Ben had taken her mobile from her and had not returned it. Upon hearing the news of the pregnancy, the guy refused to believe his ex-girlfriend. Jayden desperately tried to convince him that she had not been intimate with anyone else, so she could not get pregnant by someone else. But all her arguments ran into a wall of distrust. Ben stubbornly accused the girl of trying to lure him into a trap by imposing someone else's child on him. Ben's reaction seemed strange at the very least, because up to that point, he himself had been actively stalking his former lover. Probably the guy once again tried to make Jayden feel guilty, and thus control her emotions and decisions. Be that as it may, as a result of this tense conversation, the young people agreed on a personal meeting in order to discuss everything in detail. The day before, Jayden met with her mother and told her about her pregnancy. The girl assured her mother that she finally felt free and happy because Ben allegedly left her alone. The woman was sincerely happy about her daughter's decision because she had long tried to convince her to break off this toxic relationship, realizing how dangerous Ben could be. That day, mother and daughter talked for a long time about Jayden's current life and her plans for the future. They even agreed to go to the store together in the near future to buy the necessary things for the unborn child. But by the irony of fate, Jayden never told her mother about the horrific details of her ex-boyfriend's behavior and the planned meeting with him. The fact is that the girl was afraid of Ben's reaction. She did not want to endanger her mother, knowing about his aggressive nature. Around 3:30 p.m., 17-year-old Jayden went to meet with Ben, full of hopes and expectations. This meeting was supposed to be decisive. The girl's future life and that of her unborn child depended on it. The former lovers met at Oxford Station, getting caught on CCTV cameras. Further, Ben and Jayden's path led to the countryside near Didcot. The trusting girl believed the guy's assurances that they were heading for a picturesque picnic, where they could talk frankly in an atmosphere of peace and unity with nature. Jayden was last seen alive at Didcot Station. This moment was also recorded by CCTV cameras. From the very beginning of this fatal meeting, Ben's behavior seemed arrogant and rude. He continued to accuse Jayden of lying about her pregnancy, rejecting any of the girl's attempts to prove her case. Eventually, the young people reached a remote field, which, in Ben's opinion, was supposed to be the ideal place for a frank conversation. In fact, the guy brought Jayden here for a completely different purpose. Carefully looking around and making sure that they were left alone, Ben led Jayden to an old abandoned barn. Suspecting nothing, the girl obediently went inside, not even suspecting her companion's true intentions. No one could believe what Ben was capable of. His act forever changed the course of this story. Once in the barn, Ben abruptly changed his behavior, filled with unrestrained aggression. He began to furiously accuse Jayden of betrayal, claiming that the pregnancy was an insidious result of her infidelity. The guy's rage rapidly increased, reaching its apogee in a matter of minutes. Finally, he pounced on the defenseless girl who had so recklessly trusted him. With several powerful blows, Ben knocked Jayden off her feet. She fell to the ground, and at that moment the enraged sadist pounced on her, grabbing her throat with his hands. He squeezed her neck with inhuman strength, while the poor girl desperately tried to break free from this deadly grip. But it was in vain. Jayden gradually lost strength, no longer showing signs of life. Finally releasing her exhausted body, Ben took out his mobile phone and, using the screen, checked whether his victim was still breathing. Making sure that the girl was dead, he finally calmed down. The goal was achieved. During the subsequent investigation, forensic experts were unable to reliably confirm that Jayden was indeed pregnant at the time of the murder. There remained a possibility that the pregnancy test could have been false, or the girl deliberately deceived Ben, hoping in this way to soften his attitude towards her and establish a relationship. Be that as it may, it was no longer possible for anyone to find out the truth. Now Ben faced the urgent need to get rid of the body. Finally, he found himself in a situation that he had long dreamed of in his perverted fantasies, to commit the perfect murder and get away with it. But in a fit of reprisal against Jayden, he did not think about the tools with which he could cover up the traces of the crime. Realizing that he did not even have a shovel at hand, Ben decided to return home for the necessary tools. The footage from the CCTV cameras at the railway station clearly shows how the killer returns alone from the fields and boards a train. Only a few days later, he again visited the crime scene, but this time not alone, but with his younger brother Jake. The boy had barely turned 17. He had an absolutely unblemished reputation. He had never been noticed in connections with the criminal world or any illegal actions. But despite this, the older brother without hesitation made Jake an involuntary accomplice in his terrible deed. It is quite likely that the boy simply did not dare to refuse Ben, even realizing the dubiousness of his request. Arriving at the place, Ben imperiously ordered Jake to dig a deep hole near the barn where the murder took place. The boy obediently followed the order, perhaps realizing that disobedience could cost him his health or even his life. When Jake asked about the purpose of the pit, Ben lied that he intended to hide a weapon there. Of course, this explanation did not sound as creepy as the need to hide the body of a murdered girl. However, despite his pretended gullibility, the younger brother almost immediately sensed something was wrong, and yet he decided to remain silent and continued to dig. The pit was ready, and Ben, hastily saying goodbye to his brother, threw Jaden's bloody body into it, and then quickly covered it with earth. But even with that, the eerie story did not end. In Ben's mind, darkened by painful fantasies, another perverse plan ripened. On December 9th, 6 days after the murder, he returned to the pit and dug up the already half-decomposed body of his ex-girlfriend. Ben brought an old grandmother's suitcase with him, in which he was going to pack the remains of the unfortunate Jayden. With disgusting negligence, he shoved the body into the suitcase, giving it an unnaturally hunched pose. After that, around 1 a.m, Ben stopped a taxi. The driver, seeing a strange young man with a huge suitcase standing on the side of the road in the middle of the night, all covered in mud and with disheveled hair, for some reason did not suspect anything wrong. He obediently drove the client to the nearest church, on the territory of which there was an old cemetery. As it turned out later, it was there that Ben had prepared a grave for his victim in advance. The most impressive fact was that the murderer's younger brother was involved in digging this grave. This time, Ben lied to Jake that he was going to bury some dead animal in the cemetery. The investigation suggested that the only reason for such tacit complicity of the boy in his brother's crimes was the incredible fear of taking the place of one of the victims. It's hard to believe, but Ben even made up a whole story to justify his actions with hiding the body. He claimed that he considered it unworthy to bury his ex-lover somewhere in a field, like some dead animal. Therefore, he allegedly decided to bury her in a human way, in a cemetery, in the grave of someone close. Meanwhile, Jaden's relatives were alarmed because the girl had disappeared without a trace. She did not answer calls, ignored all messages. The mother of the unfortunate girl tried to find her through friends, checked the shelter where she lived, but all attempts were in vain. Jaden's phone remained with Ben, who later simply sold the device, completely depriving the missing girl's relatives of the opportunity to contact her. On December 4th, 2013, the Parkinson family finally turned to the police with a statement about Jaden's disappearance. Law enforcement officers immediately began an investigation. They interviewed the girl's relatives and acquaintances, posted leaflets with her photographs, and involved volunteers in the search operation. About 100 police officers were involved in these searches. They combed the area, inspected the territory from the air, reviewed CCTV footage throughout the city. And at some point, the first alarming signs began to appear, which indicated the involvement of the girl's ex-boyfriend in her disappearance. As a result, all the evidence led the investigators to the doorstep of Ben's house. Based on the information gathered, the police accused the young man of kidnapping Jayden. However, from the very beginning, he began to deny that he had seen the girl on the day of her disappearance. Of course, the investigators did not believe a single word of his, because they had heard a lot of evidence about how Ben communicated and behaved with Jayden shortly before her disappearance, and the CCTV footage contradicted his words. Trying to convince the police of his non-involvement, Ben began to get angry, shout, and even allowed himself veiled threats against law enforcement officers. It seemed that the guy did not realize at all how serious the situation was and with whom he was talking. During interrogations, the suspect behaved extremely arrogantly and aggressively, which only increased the suspicions of detectives. They felt that Ben was clearly hiding something. During interrogations, the young man tried to convince the investigation that he had parted with Jayden long ago, that she no longer interested him, and therefore he had no idea where she could be. But since the girl had disappeared more than a week ago, the police began to consider the worst-case scenario. Jayden was no longer alive. The progress of the investigation was actively covered in the media, which eventually bore fruit. A taxi driver who had given Ben a ride with a huge suitcase to the church cemetery that fateful night contacted the police. The man recognized the main suspect and wanted to share his memories of those events. Having received this information, the investigators, together with the dog handlers, went to inspect the place indicated by the taxi driver. Soon, in an old barn near the church, a suitcase was found that exactly matched the description of the one that Ben was carrying in a taxi. In parallel, there was a shift in the conversation with the suspect's brother. Jake admitted that his older brother had twice forced him to dig holes in suspicious places, although he did not explain what for. All these facts made it possible on December 19th, on the eve of Christmas, to find the body of the missing girl. This day forever darkened the life of the Parkinson family. The autopsy of Jayden's body, conducted by a forensic expert, showed that the cause of the girl's death was strangulation. On her face and head, relatively large bruises were found, the nature of which indicated strong blows with a fist or foot. The official identification of the deceased was carried out by her mother, who was forced to experience the worst thing that can happen to parents, to bury her own child. While awaiting court hearings, Ben was in custody. It was during this period that he wrote a confession to the crime he had committed. However, the main line of his defense was the statement that he could not be held responsible for the murder because of his alleged mental illness. Obviously, in this way, the suspect hoped to avoid punishment. Psychiatric examinations were appointed, which refuted his statements. According to experts, at the time of the murder, the young man was fully aware of his actions. Ben was charged not only with premeditated murder, but also with desecrating the body of the deceased. His lawyer insisted that the defendant had no criminal intent when he went with his ex-girlfriend to a remote countryside. They allegedly just planned to talk. Also, the defense denied the facts of Ben's cruel treatment of Jayden. However, during the investigation, many witnesses were found who revealed the full depth of the accused's cruelty towards the deceased. About 10 people from Jayden's circle confirmed that they had repeatedly seen traces of beatings on the girl's body, noticed striking changes in her behavior under the influence of Ben's psychological manipulations. But the most chilling details were revealed in their conclusions by forensic experts. Experts were convinced that the accused strangled his victim at least 3 times, each time bringing her to her senses. Obviously, he did it for the sake of perverted pleasure. Throughout the trial, the defendant showed no signs of remorse. He could suddenly laugh, make an inappropriate joke, and then suddenly get angry and start insulting everyone present. Once Ben even threatened the prosecutor with physical violence. Of course, such behavior only worsened his position and convinced the jury of the absolute inadequacy of the accused. After the court hearings were over, the jurors gathered for a meeting to make a verdict. The discussion lasted about 20 hours. As a result, 11 out of 12 members of the panel found Ben guilty of premeditated murder. When the judge was about to announce the verdict, the convicted man threw a real tantrum. He screamed, writhed in convulsions, and accused Jayden of conspiring against him. Despite all this, Ben believed that he deserved the death penalty. He said that he sees the murdered girl in his dreams. But since 2003, in the United Kingdom, the highest measure of punishment is life imprisonment. The judge emphasized that the convicted person poses a considerable danger to society. Ben was sentenced to the maximum penalty, life imprisonment with the right to review the sentence no earlier than after 20 years. After the end of the process over Jayden's killer, problems began with his younger brother. Jake tried for a long time to prove that he did not directly participate in the murder and helped to get rid of the body against his will. Eventually, he managed to convince the jury that he had become a victim of psychological pressure from his older brother and had been in fear the whole time. He was afraid that Ben would throw him into one of those pits. Jayden Parkinson's relatives expressed the hope that her killer will never be released, because he is an extremely dangerous person. The girl's mother is convinced that the problem of domestic violence should be discussed from school, so that young girls are aware of and beware of any manifestations of abuse in relationships, Do not get involved with guys who are prone to manipulation and aggression. This story will forever leave a mark in the hearts of those who heard it. But the most important question is what lessons we will learn from it. Leave your comments under the video, support it with a like. I hope that after this you will pay more attention to your loved ones. And of course, subscribe to our channel so as not to miss new, fascinating, and instructive stories from real life that we carefully select for you. Take care of yourself. I love you all.